All right. Good evening, everyone, or whenever you see this afternoon, probably afternoon when I release it. I'm Omar, as always, and I'm joined by a guest, my friend Ethan Hampsten. Before we start, can you introduce yourself and just tell everyone about who you are, what you do?
Well, hello guys. Thank you, Omar, for having me. This is going to be a fun time. But my name is Ethan Hampsten. I just got done. I played a couple years at New Mexico Highlands, small D2, Las Vegas, New Mexico. But college football had great experience. Now I'm transferring down to NMSU. The plan is to play ball there, so we shall see how that turns out. But yeah, like I said, thank you for having me. I'm ready to get to talking.
Yeah, for sure. And NMSU is one of the schools I always pull for. My sister graduated from UNM. My younger sister spent a year at NMSU before the pandemic, before she came back home to UNM. But I still pull for the Aggies. This year should be interesting schedule, especially like the two Hawaii games. I'm
Yeah.
sure that's something that people will look at and think is kind of strange, but they've done it before with Liberty. And I'm kind of bitter towards that particular series because I think the Army game is what they canceled. Hawaii canceled the Army game to make room for New Mexico State, but it's better for travel and it's a good old whack game. So I mean, who doesn't
Yeah.
love the
Brings
whack?
back the memories, man.
Yeah, exactly. Bring back the whack. Return of the whack.
Turn
Uh,
the
while the whack is returning in 2021, that's not the FCS conference we're going to be talking about today. And while conference realignment is happening, we're not going to be talking about the SEC or the Big 12, but rather an expansion that almost happened almost 40 years ago with the Ivy League. And the gist of what happened, or I guess the schools involved in what happened, was in 1982, the Ivy League was looking to expand past the 8 schools that Harvard, Yale, Brown, Cornell, Dartmouth, Princeton. Shoot, who else am I missing? Columbia. And if I missed one, I missed one, whatever. But past those 8 schools. And on that short list, there were 6 schools, according to the New York Times Press. I'll put a link to the article in the description. But the 6 schools that were implicated were Colgate, Holy Cross, William and Mary, Army, Navy, and Northwestern. So we'll go down the line and talk about in general what this expansion could have done for the conference and each school's sort of I guess validity for expansion. So starting off, Ethan, what do you think that the Ivy League should ever expand? I mean, I'm against expansion in general. I want to hear your take.
I'm against it as well, and the reason I say this is because it's such a prestigious conference. I think, and then the second thing is they play in the FCS in football. It's so hard to get teams to join an FCS conference, especially the bigger schools like we're going to talk about. Like you said, the Army, the Northwestern, the Navy. It's so hard to bring that traction. And I also think that I think expansion to the Ivy League is going to take a lot more than just sports. Obviously we talked about this. Like we're talking about the school's prestige is going to be huge. So me, like I said, I'm with you. I'm against the expansion of the Ivy League.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great to have a conference like the Ivy League that stands the test of time, and whether they should participate in the postseason. I've had talks with other FCS writers, FCS figures that think that should change. I'm against that as well. But the Ivy League represents everything that's good about college sports. In terms of stability, long-term stability and whatnot. So I too am against expansion, but the candidates listed in this 1982 article are I think they're pretty valid candidates. We'll start with a Holy Cross, a school that I've been known to love on this podcast and others as I grew up near Holy Cross. But Holy Cross, you have the school in Worcester, probably I'd say the third most well known. Well, actually, I'm not going to rank in terms of well known, but one of the most well known and prestigious Catholic institutions in America. Out of Worcester, Massachusetts, central Massachusetts. They have a proud history. They went to the Orange Bowl in 1948, I believe. You have Heisman finalist Gordy Lockbaum in the 80s, putting Holy Cross back on the map. Really a proud tradition out in the Seven Hills of Worcester. So I guess on a scale of 1 to 10, or even like, what do you think about their candidacy in the Ivy League?
I think Holy Cross actually would be one of the ones I would consider to actually join the Ivy League. And the reason I say this is because you look at historically basketball wise, they've been very competitive in the Patriot League, for the past 4 or 5 years at least. So I think that's why that's the first thing right there. Second off, academically, they're great. They're one of those teams up there with Boston U, killing it with Bucknell. They're killing it academically. So I actually think the last thing, they're in the FCS. They already compete in the FCS in football too. Like I said, the whole Patriot League thing. So that's why I think they would actually be a solid candidate. So from a scale from 1 to 10, I would say Holy Cross is 7, joining the Ivy League.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty solid rating. I think I'd go 7 as well with all the things you mentioned. The one hurdle is a cultural hurdle, being a Catholic school.
Mhm.
I mean, but even then, like being in the Patriot League as it is now, I think out of all of those schools, only Georgetown, and Georgetown's only a football member. Georgetown and Holy Cross are the only, and Fordham. Those 3 schools are the only Catholic members, with 2 of those being football only members. So I do think they're a good fit. The Harvard Holy Cross rivalry, that's one that is it's an underrated rivalry for sure. But Holy Cross gets their licks in at times. I think 2008, 2008, I went to a Holy Cross Harvard game and Holy Cross pulled it off out of Fitton Field. But just a great rivalry to have in house. Whether that would be a ratings generator on Friday nights in the Ivy League, that's to be determined. I would say it's not, but still, even now, imagining Holy Cross competing for Ivy League titles now after winning back-to-back Patriot League titles, it's an interesting thought. I mean, the Ivy League title races, I think now that Harvard's taken a bit of a step back, they have gotten way more interesting, in my opinion.
I agree. And I think, like I said, I think Holy Cross also bring an intriguing matchup in basketball as well. I think
Oh
you're
yeah.
a lot to the table basketball wise. So that's a big reason for me with them, you know.
Yeah, I actually just read an article before we got on that Holy Cross actually turned down membership in the Big East, which hurts me. That actually hurts me.
That is wild. I actually did not know that. Especially, that would have been a tough conference for them to go in and compete right away, you know. But that's all. That's wild. That's wild
Yeah, I
stuff.
mean, at the time of the 70s, they'd won their conference. Well, they'd won the ECAC, pretty much like the big conglomerate of Eastern schools that, I mean, that's the reason the Big East was created, because the NCAA took away all their bids. They won the ECAC in 1977 and 1980. Of course, they had Bob Cousy, Tommy Heinsohn. They won the title back in the 50s. So, like, proud of basketball tradition at the time. As of now, of course, to kind of de-emphasize, as like the Ivy League did in football, and that tradition's been kind of on the decline. But yeah, still a very valid team in basketball, a very good candidate basketball wise. Moving on to the next school we'll discuss that was in the report is Colgate, out there in Hamilton, New York, and upstate. And Colgate is another team with a very proud tradition in football. As I've written and talked about a little bit before, you have the famous, and I swear, if I had a jar for every time I mentioned the 1932 Colgate team, the undefeated, untied, unscored upon, uninvited team, yeah, I'd have a full jar because I love talking about that team. It's a good story.
Like
Yeah.
1994 BYU, man.
Yeah, like 84 BYU. Whether Colgate would have won that Rose Bowl, that's a different discussion for a different time. But it's good to just imagine. But again, you have Colgate up in upstate New York, and good academic school. What's fascinating about them is they've reached pretty much the highest of heights in the Patriot League of any Patriot League school, being a national runner-up in 2003, losing to Delaware. Numerous titles. The 2018 team was recently probably one of the best defenses we'll see in recent memory in Division I football,
And yeah,
aside
that
from
was the team, if
2011.
I'm not mistaken, they lost to North Dakota State, right, in the playoffs.
Yeah, yeah, they
28.
they
Yep.
did.
I
Yeah,
remember that team.
yeah. I think they had a streak of, I think, 6 or 7 straight games without allowing a touchdown again. And then of course that streak ended end of the year against Army. But they were highly competitive in that game. I remember being there in the stands, and it was 21-14 late in the game. So really competitive school. Things are a bit rougher now the past couple of seasons, but I have no doubt that Colgate will get back on top. Fascinating school with all this tradition and I guess football prowess. But what do you think, Ethan, about Colgate being a candidate back in '82?
This is another school I really like, just like Holy Cross. You know, especially like you said, just the history involved in this team, the academic prestige. It fits an Ivy League school. Like when you talk about Colgate, you would actually think they're an Ivy League school. I actually like them more than I do with Holy Cross, especially what you're saying too. And I like they've been super competitive in football lately, and not just that. Like so they played in the NCAA tournament last year in basketball. Was competitive. Arkansas, like I said, if you were to go back to '82, or even now, I think they would be a great deal for an expansion team. And I think from a scale from 1 to 10, I'll actually give them an 8. I really, and like I said, geographically, or it's perfect.
Yeah, I'm gonna go up higher with that. I'm gonna say a 9 for Colgate with all that. because in upstate New York, there really isn't much of a footprint. And for all the reasons mentioned, but also adding that sort of Colgate Cornell rivalry to the conference, because you have the Empire State Cup, you have Cornell Columbia, and that rivalry really doesn't have much to it, I think. Granted, it's because of Columbia's historic struggles with their losing streak in the 80s and only one Ivy League title to their name. And really Cornell's recent struggles, really struggling out in the Ivy League, even though I do think they're a team to watch this year as they upset Dartmouth, and probably the biggest upset of 2019. Look it up, anyone watching. But I think that rivalry adds a new degree to it, as well as basketball, because in March Madness this past spring, Colgate was one of those teams that people had on their upset, because the NET rankings, the net rankings, had them highly efficient offense, loving to score, and really dominant in Patriot League play. But I think they would have been a good candidate.
Undefeated in Patriot play this year, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh no, they had one loss. That was to Army. That loss was to
the
Army.
one loss to Army. They had the one loss to Army.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
That's something. I mean, we'll take our victories in basketball whenever we get them. It's been hard to be our Army basketball fan for almost ever. But
yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I like their candidacy a lot, honestly, Colgate. And the one thing for sure, though, that I guess you put them in this league, you don't have that 0-3 title game run. I'm not sure other fans would feel about that, but I mean, it is Ivy League.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's just gonna be tough with that no playoff kind of thing, but that's the risk you take when you join the Ivy League as well.
Yeah, it's a trade-off. I mean, for not participating in the playoffs, you have like the money. I mean, I'm not sure what the money is for their TV contract, but I would assume it's probably one of the highest in FCS football, if not the highest. I mean, they're the only team. They're the conference, that gets the most national TV spots of any FCS conference aside from the SWAC and MEAC. So,
yep.
Well, moving on to our next school, we have William and Mary, and this one's a bit of a funny fit out in Virginia. William and Mary being one of the oldest, I think the second oldest college in America, I think they're the second oldest college in America. Really not much of a proud, when you think about, I guess, proud programs, not as proud, but I will say that for a bit of history, one of their famous alumni, not really famous, but trailblazing alumni in football, Arthur Matsu, he was the first Asian American quarterback in the NFL. I stumbled across him studying for my thesis, and I was ultimately fascinated. So I'll look him up for those of you watching. But not much of a proud history in all. I'm pulling up their stats for how many bowl games they've been to. I can't imagine it's been many. They've been to 3 bowls. Last in 1970, the Tangerine Bowl, when they appeared with a losing record. They were 5-6. And the coach of that team, who the coach of that team was, Ethan?
Who was the coach of that team?
Lou Holtz.
Really? Lou Holtz?
Yeah, Lou Holtz.
That's crazy. Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah, I mean, really, really good. I guess, humble start to his career, but even then,
Notre Dame days.
Yeah, definitely not Notre Dame, but not really a proud program. Academic prowess, I'm sure they have good academic prowess. It's just like you don't really hear about William and Mary much when it comes to it. So, Ethan, what are your thoughts on William and Mary being a candidate for this expansion in the 80s?
William Mary, I think I'm not too high on them as I am obviously with Colgate or Holy Cross. And the reason I say that, they don't have the rivalry. I don't know if the tradition. I mean, the tradition's there because they're older school, one of the colonial schools, obviously. But I don't know if I don't know if they'll get the same revenue, the same rivalry as like a Holy Cross Harvard game will get, or like you were saying, maybe a Dartmouth versus a Colgate. Like I just don't see the same interactions there. Same with their basketball and football. I know they haven't been to the playoffs since 2015. I know there's no playoffs in the Ivy League, but I feel like you still want to bring in teams that are dominating, not dominating, but are playing well right now if you want to bring them to the Ivy League. So on a scale from 1 to 10, I would put William Mary at a 5. That would be where I would be with them.
Yeah, I'm about middle of the road as well with William and Mary. And for me, for all those reasons that you said, in addition to non-revenue sports, and those get really looked over in terms of conference realignment anytime it happens, I'm sure that Dartmouth would be very opposed to having to travel to Northern Virginia for women's field hockey games or for men's squash games. I mean, I'm sure they would be very opposed to that. And again, yeah, the rivalries just aren't there, and they'd be leaving a good amount of rivalries too, or they would have at that time, being the SoCon in the 80s, leaving the rivalry with Richmond, the Capital Cup that's had
Yep.
over 127 matchups, on a lesser degree, VMI, those Virginia rivalries. So would not
Terry.
have been a good marriage for both parties. Might have been better competitively though for William and Mary. I want to get your take on whether, I guess, going to the Ivy League would have been better competitively for the William and Mary tribe.
I think going in the Ivy League, I think it would have been a better. I think it would have been competitive for him. I think it would have been a solid move. Like I said, maybe not the time, but at the same time, like we're just talking about, it's hard for me to just sit here and say the Ivy League would have been more competitive because, like I said, they already had these rivalries established with like Virginia Military Institute. So how do you do it? That's just my opinion with that one.
Yeah. And on that note, I do think that now, I think going to the SoCon would be a good move now for William and Mary. I mean, the rivalry, at least with VMI, is there. It's a better regional fit. They're not making occasional trips up north to Stony Brook, Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, like you name it, all these New England schools. It's better geographical fit. But only time will tell. I don't think any FCS realignment will happen anytime soon unless it's a Southland, which would, in all reality, not really affect the CAA.
Agreed.
So I guess moving on to the bigger schools that were implicated in this realignment. First off, we'll go with the service academies. Army and Navy were implicated in that, and I have mixed feelings about this because academically, I do want to consider the academies as on par with Ivy League schools, but competitively, as especially recently, it's just on different levels. That was not the story, of course, in the 80s and up until the mid 90s. Army scheduled Ivy League schools pretty frequently. The 1996 team that went 10-2 playing the Independence Bowl, they had a game against Yale. Yale, Harvard, Princeton, all those schools are regular fixtures on Army schedule, and the same thing with Navy, having those Ivy League schools. So the familiarity was there, but it's like I think the one thing that sort of breaks it is like the Army Navy game, even despite the struggles in the 80s, like it in the, I guess, late 70s and early 80s, the game has always had a huge draw on the college football schedule, on the D1 landscape. So it would have been strange, honestly.
I agree with that one for sure. Like I said, I just feel like Army and Navy. Like so now looking at it, you look at it and you're like, they'll never be in the Ivy League. But if you go back to 1982, I honestly could have seen the fit there. And the reason I say that is, like I said, geographically, they're right there. You bring in a rival, probably the biggest rivalry in college football, and not just the biggest rivalry in college football. It would be, you'll just be crazy. I see one of the biggest rivalry in sports, and that's my opinion. With Army Navy, so you bring that into the conference like the Ivy League, and you get them with Yale, Harvard, Dartmouth, Columbia, all these schools that have been around since Army and Navy. These traditions, these could be the oldest traditions in sports history, the oldest games in sports history still going on today if they would have joined 1982. That would have been some crazy stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's where I stand. Like, you have like really the brand power of the Ivy League would have been amazing, because you fast forward a few years, the Ivy League gets their contract with PBS. They got their games broadcasted on PBS at the Ivy League Game of the Week. I mean, the draw of having an Army on that a few times a year, Army and Navy, Army and Air Force on that, and again, Army, Harvard, you name it. The draw of that would have been amazing. And if you go back to 1981, like you said, it was kind of a realistic proposition, because you have, at least in 81, Army was coming off a 3-7-1 year. They struggled. They lost to Virginia Military Institute. They narrowly beat Brown. They lost to Holy Cross by 2 touchdowns. So this is Army, a more bound Army program. Navy, on the other hand, while they were still making bowls, you could still kind of sense sort of, I guess, an end of the glory days for Navy, because in 1980 they'd gotten blown out by Houston in the Garden State Bowl. And then you fast forward to 1982, George Welsh leaves for Virginia and does his legendary stuff there with the Cavaliers. So it's realistic, and I'm torn on it, because as we stand now, I mean, I like Army standing as an independent. It's great and all, but Navy, I mean, I like Navy's place in the American. Navy's place in the best conference in the group of 5 has done wonders, I think, for service academy football. So I'm torn on this. If I had to give it a rating, honestly, I'm gonna go 8. I'm gonna go 8 out of 10. Not exactly like a layup, but pretty close to it, but pretty conflicting.
And like I said, I'm kind of with you, but like I said, if you take me back to 1981 when this idea was proposed, I would just give it an 8 or 9. And like so, the reason I say that because it picks up these rivalries that have been around for years and years and years, and that's incredible. Now, obviously, I wouldn't consider. Obviously, I don't think anyone would consider it. It wouldn't make sense for any of the two teams to do it, especially like you said. What I think the American Conference has done for Navy, I think, like you said, I think it's done wonders. I think it's been a great, great, great thing for them to do it. I remember Keenan Reynolds running a couple of years ago over there, and I was like, okay, this team's legit. It's cool to see Navy on the map. So I think right now, I think everything worked out the right way. But if they would have joined the Ivy League in 1981, 82, I would have loved to see that too. So I don't think there's really no right or wrong here, in my opinion. But like, so I'll give it a 6. The reason I say that is just because how well everything ended up playing out.
Yeah. Hindsight's 2020. I will say this about like, the rivalries in 2014 for the 100th anniversary of the Yale Bowl. Army visited Yale, and that's a game that still triggers me to this day. Army loses in double overtime, 49-43 to Yale. But even then, you could sense that there was a special aura on that day. I mean, two monumental powers in the history of college football playing a rivalry. It was like straight out of the 1930s, where this game was one of those types of games that would be wired across the country on national radio.
Yep.
You'd be sitting next to the radio, hearing reports of Army Yale. So yeah, the rivalries would have been great. I mean, I think the one thing that Army lacks now that I guess I wouldn't say it hurts the program, but that I do wish we had more of was regional rivalries. And that's sort of coming back, not in the best way as Army schedules. I mean, they have UMass and UConn on the schedule for the next 10 years, I think. And that's good, but it's not on the level like Army Yale, Army Harvard, or even like Army Syracuse, Army Boston College.
No, yeah, I agree. And like it's just not the same. It's not, and it's like it's hard because Army is independent. So you have to pick up teams like the UMass and the UConns who are also independent. But like I said, the magnitude's not there like it would be with the Yale. And like I said, those rivalries with the Yale or a Harvard, those teams that you play, there's just the energy is just off the charts. It's like Yankees. It's like you say, you take it feels you like you're 1930. You got the Red Sox Yankees going on to the next day. Before you got Army Navy or Army Yale. It's crazy. So yeah, the magnitude is different for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's always fun with these, I guess, what if scenarios, really, like thinking about the rivalries that would have happened. And I mean, just going back to yesteryear, I am a proponent of Army scheduling the Ivy League schools more, I guess. I'm not really sure what the regulation is, but Army had Princeton on the schedule in 2020 before the pandemic. And then they have Dartmouth, which I think that Dartmouth game has something to do with Coach Red Blake's, I guess, something with Coach Red Blake because he coached at Dartmouth. But yeah, I guess moving on to finally our last school, Northwestern. And before you scratch your head and wonder for context here, Northwestern was in the midst of one of the worst losing streak, or the worst losing streak in FBS football, one of the worst in Division I football in general, FCS included, ending at 34 straight losses. But that Northwestern program had really questions surrounding its competitiveness in the Big Ten. And of course, as we know, Northwestern is a great academic school. But with this context, I kind of struggle with Northwestern being a solid candidate because the Big Ten, going from the Big Ten to the Ivy League is a big leap down. And perception wise, it's not a great look to the fans and to outsiders. Like we both saw when Idaho jumped from the Sun Belt to the Big Sky, how that was perceived. I think it would have been similar at that time. And Chicago, it sticks out like a sore thumb on the geographical landscape of the Ivy League.
Yeah, I'm right with you, man. I wouldn't like to see Northwestern go down to the Ivy League. And like I said, even at the time with them struggling, dropping from the Big Ten, a big conference, all the way down to an FCS school. FCS that's the first issue there. Second issue, like you said, Chicago, like you said, what we were talking about earlier, why would Dartmouth, Columbia, why would any of those schools want to make the trip to Chicago to every single week, And just it sticks out. It's not right. Academically, yes, they're there, but geographically it didn't fit. Competitiveness, I don't know how it would have been at the time. Obviously wouldn't now, but I don't know. Like I said, I still think they would have been fine jumping from the Big Ten down to the Ivy League. like I said, for me, the main reason is geographic. It just wouldn't make sense. The geographic location, Northwestern, wouldn't make sense, especially because the Ivy League schools have always been that Northeast. You think Ivy League, you think Northeast. Throwing Northwestern there, just it takes the perception away, you know?
Yeah, I think at that time, had the Patriot League existed earlier, I feel like that might have been a better fit, because if you look at the Patriot League's early years, they kind of went through identity crisis. Davidson was a member for a couple of years out of North Carolina. That's something that I was surprised to find out, because I think of them as Northeastern Conference. But I think honestly, yeah, like you said, like weird geographical fit, like we said, weird geographical fit. But I think we're all the better off for it, arguably, because we have the 1996 Rose Bowl. But I mean, what a great run that was for Northwestern. And just like honestly, year in, year out, Northwestern's been one of the, I guess, easier teams to root for. Just knowing that everything that they have stacked against them academically and physically in the Big Ten, to see them appear in two different Big Ten title games, a couple New Year's bowls. It's been great. And Pat Fitzgerald, I hope he never gets poached away from the NFL or
Yep.
to the NFL.
I mean, even what they did last year was incredible. You know, they had a great season last year, and like you said, you see these seasons from them in and out, come in here and there, and like so, I agree, they're the underdogs in the Big Ten. So it's cool when you see them win. It builds that perception. So I love that they stayed in the Big Ten. I love that they didn't back down. You know, so I'm with you there.
Yeah, and I mean, it hurts me like just thinking about that Michigan State loss, because they could have been in the New Year's Six. They could have broke the New Year's Six if it weren't for that fluke loss. Geez, I mean, maybe this year might be a year for them, but you know, you just never know.
But well, I mean, they stay competitive with Ohio State too, so yeah, it's crazy.
Even that, yeah, they missed a year of missed, like a great year for Northwestern, but just a year of missed opportunities. I mean, you mentioned the Ohio State game, like they had the lead, they could have blown the game open, but they ultimately did not. I mean, but you know, Northwestern, they'll be back. I mean, they'll be somewhere. They'll be in bowl season. I mean,
oh yeah,
they will.
On the rebound.
So with all these candidates that we discussed, I guess a question that I kind of want to close with is, on the college football landscape, do you think this has huge reverberations? Because for me, I think that the Patriot League might not get off the ground if Army, at least football wise, if Army and Navy join. Well, maybe not Army and Navy, but if Colgate and Holy Cross join, that's two of their I think founding members right there. So I mean, what are your thoughts on I guess this expansion on the college football landscape if it happened?
Oh, it would have been crazy. It's like that's like if you time travel and kill a bug, it changes everything. So I think it would have been huge. Like I don't even know if the Patriot League would have been formed. It's like I said, one of Colgate, one of the founding fathers of the Patriot League, you pull them apart. Where does Bucknell go? Where does Davidson go? Where these teams go for basketball? Because you know how the FCS works. They're not on the same conference in basketball. You have basketball only schools. It could have been huge. What if Villanova go somewhere else? What if the Big East disbands? I think it could have been huge. I think it would have had huge repercussions, you know?
Yeah, and I do agree with that. And you mentioned Davidson. So I do think the Pac-12, not the Pac-12. I think the Patriot League does form. I think they stay small. Like you got, let's see, you'd have Georgetown, Lehigh, Lafayette, Bucknell, let's see, and Fordham. So that's 5 members. And I think you keep Davidson at 6. So you have 6 members and a pretty close knit 6 members. Of course, that precludes Davidson not joining the Pioneer League, which really isn't a loss, because there will always be schools that aren't bought into football for that league. And it seems like it'll always survive.
Davidson was those schools that after Steph Curry dominated in basketball, they went all basketball and was transferred to the A10. So you don't know
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I will say with that though, I guess Davidson in the Patriot League, they might be, they would be a football only member. So I wouldn't go as far as to say that Steph Curry would not get as much exposure being in the Patriot League, because I mean they'd still be in the SoCon. So yeah, but past that, I'm not sure I can see much more reverberations. I think maybe you see the Ivy League being more relevant if they add Army and Navy, because you have the Army and Navy game being under that umbrella, under the Ivy League umbrella. And then having them in the thick of, I guess, conference races would have been cool. But I mean, I just don't see much more past, I guess, the Patriot League just being sort of weaker in general.
Yeah, I agree to an extent. Like, so the reason I just say that is because it depends really who would have joined. If you pull out a team like an Army or a Navy, I feel like other conferences, they'll see these things, they'll look at it, and it's like, okay, where does I know the American? Who knows how the American? Who knows how other conferences realign? That's just my opinion, and I think another reason I say it would have had huge repercussions because, like I said, Georgetown's another team. They went to the Big East. You don't know if Villanova could have joined. What if Villanova would have applied for the Ivy League? That would have been crazy too. Like, so I just don't know what other schools would. Just for me, it depended on which schools would have joined. And
Yeah.
Depends which
Yeah,
one.
all it takes is one school. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. And all it takes is one school. I forgot about Navy and the American like that. What consequences that have? Like, I mean, I think that would have huge repercussions for for Conference USA. I mean, because to get to that 12, you'd probably have a Conference USA team, maybe Southern Miss, get pulled up there. So yeah, I mean, we'll never know, but it's a fun scenario to play in our head, and it's one that people forget about really, because when you think of like huge, I guess, like what could have been conferences, you have the Airplane Conference in the 60s, and then you have the Metro Conference, which I think would have been an amazing idea to have, where you had sort of like what became Conference USA and the Big East in two separate conferences, or two in a 16-team conference, excuse me. But you don't really hear about this Ivy League expansion.
Yeah, no, you hear about all the FBS expansions, all the former FBS, like I said, the old WAC. You hear about it all the time. So, yeah, this is definitely something like I said people forget about, especially when you could have pulled FBS teams into the FCS. So it's crazy stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's all I have to say about it, about this great scenario. I mean, Ethan, do you have anything extra to add?
No, like I said, just it's something that we forget about. So I hope people watching, I hope they remember Ivy League expansion, 1981-82. What could have been? What could have been?
Yeah, exactly. What could have been? Still watch Ivy League football this fall. They're back. Without a lot of familiar faces, but still should be quality play. You got Dartmouth looking to defend their title. Yale too. Yale without the great Kurt Rollins. Just good things all around. That's all I have. Ethan, do you have any final thoughts?
No, man, I think you called it right there.
All right, yeah.
Excited for Yale Harvard though. Always excited for that one, man.
Oh yeah. Always a classic. I hope they can play it at Fenway more. Honestly, that was a really good
playing
thing.
at Fenway Park, so traditional.
Yeah, I mean, really great. So yeah, I mean, there you have it. Ethan, thanks for joining. We hope to have you on more times in the future. We'll let you know.
Of course, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries, man. It's a pleasure. I mean, the pleasure's mine. So until next time, signing off. Peace, love, and soul, everyone.